of Health, DOH, and Human Services for housing support of 1,000 people who may need to be quarantined upon arrival from overseas travel due to the novel coronavirus, a Pentagon statement explained. So then it goes on to say the facilities, which each contains at least 250 individual rooms, will be made available through February 29th through the housing request, officials said. They are located at the 168th Regiment's Regional Training Institute in Fort Carson, Colorado, Travis Air Force Base, and Marine Corps Air Station Miramar in California, and Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. The Department of Defense is only providing housing support, and U.S. military personnel will not come in direct contact with any quarantined individuals who will not have access to any areas on base other than the quarantine facilities. The Department of Health and Human Services will handle care, transportation, and security issues. So here on Friday, January 31st, the U.S. government declared the novel coronavirus a public health emergency. U.S. Citizens who were in Hubei, which is one of the newer cities that recently got plagued by the coronavirus, which Wuhan is the capital city. Within 2 weeks of their return to the U.S., will be quarantined for 14 days, which is a total of 2 weeks. Which really, the word quarantine, when you look it up, means 40 or the 40. Okay, so really, a real quarantine is when you're secluded from the outer perimeters of wherever you're being quarantined at. You're basically forbidden from leaving outside of a certain particular area for 40 days. That's what a quarantine is. And as a matter of fact, let's just look up the word quarantine, because quora, Qara, I believe actually means 40. And then teen means to contain. So quarantine means to contain for 40 days. Here, let's just try to type in quarantine. Whoop, excuse me, I accidentally misspelled quarantine. Okay. Quarantine meaning. So look up the meaning of quarantine. Okay. Let's see. A state or place of isolation in which people or animals that have arrived from elsewhere or been exposed to infectious or contagious disease or place. Let's see. What happens during a quarantine? What is the quarantine rule? Booyah! Check this out. What is quarantine rule? Now, a strict isolation imposed to prevent the spread of disease, a period originally 40 days of detention, or isolation imposed upon ships, persons, animals, or plants on arrival at a port or place when suspected of carrying some infectious or contagious disease. So that's a quarantine. A quarantine is when you're isolated or contained within a particular area for 40 days. So the word quarantine means to contain for 40 days. So now you understand what a true quarantine is. So if somebody's being quarantined for 14 days, that's not a real quarantine, okay? A real quarantine is when somebody's being contained with or confined within a certain area for 40 days. And 40 days is like a month. And hold on, let me see. So let's just say if there was 31 days in a month, right? So that will be a month, a week, and 2 days. So a quarantine can last up to a month, a week, and 2 days. And really, if you do it by the Hebrew calendar, okay, if you do it by the Hebrew calendar, it's a month, because there's 30 days in a month, right? You know, there are 30 days before the new moon kicks in. So there's 30 days in a month according to the Hebrew calendar, according to the new moon, right? So that'd be a month, a week, and 3 days according to the Hebrew calendar. That's how long a quarantine would last. But it says travelers returning from other locations in China will be screened at ports of entry. Okay, around 200 people who were evacuated out of Wuhan and arrived in the U.S. Wednesday have been quarantined at March Air Reserve Base in California. So they already have quarantines being set up here in the United States. And California is one of those states where quarantines are being held. Okay, as of February 2nd, which will be 18 days ago, the coronavirus had killed nearly 400 people and affected more than 12,000 people in China and in around 24 other countries. And I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but I have to keep saying it. Whenever they give you a number, you always have to multiply it by 1,000. Okay? You always got to multiply it by 1,000. They say 12,000, but it's actually over hundreds of thousands of people who have been infected by this virus. Okay? Because around February the 2nd, there was an insider in China that said that there was over 1 million cases. So how the hell is there over 1 million cases, but only 400 people died? Does that make sense at all? No, it don't. Okay? And like I said, you don't quarantine off whole entire cities over 1,000 people or over 400 people. The only time you quarantine off whole entire cities like Wuhan is when there's hundreds of thousands of cases. When there's thousands, people dying by the thousands, or when people by the thousands of tens of thousands or the hundreds of thousands are dying from a particular virus or disease. That's when you quarantine something. You don't quarantine somebody when there's only 400 people that are infected or 12,000. Well, I mean, you don't quarantine an entire city off when there's only 12,000 people that's affected, okay? Hell, there's been times when 100,000 people have caught the cold in a particular state in America. They ain't do a quarantine. People just went to the doctor and they were fine, right? So would it make sense to quarantine an entire city over 400 people dying? No. You will quarantine an entire city when there's hundreds of thousands of cases and when there's tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people dying from the virus. That's when you quarantine off entire cities. That will be considered an emergency. So don't believe these numbers, okay? Okay, there's over 2 million cases of people who got the virus. And nearly over 1 million people have already died from the coronavirus. But they're not going to tell you that in the news. They're not going to tell you that. They're going to tell you, oh, there's only been 12,000 deaths. And you know why they give you these small numbers? To avoid panic. They don't want panic. They don't want people to panic. Okay? That's why Yahushua said this. Let me just get it in the book of Google real quick. That's why Yahushua said this to his